What if the greatest weapon of the Viking Age was not forged in fire, but grown quietly in the soil, forgotten, buried, and erased by time? The night presses down on the north like a living thing. The sky is a hard black stone, starless and cold, and the wind moves across the land with the patience of a predator. Somewhere beyond the dark, the sea groans as ice grinds against ice. This is a world that does not forgive weakness. This is a world where survival is earned every single day. And yet against this merciless cold, men and women rise before dawn, shoulders squared, stomachs full enough to face the storm. Not full of meat, not full of wine, but full of grain. We have been told a simple story about the Vikings. That they were powered by rage, by iron, by blood and bone. That their strength came from the sword, the axe, the shield wall. But stories like that are easy, comfortable. They allow us to admire the drama while ignoring the truth beneath it. Because steel alone cannot cross oceans. Fury alone cannot survive winter. And no warrior, no matter how fierce, can fight on an empty stomach. There is another story, older, quieter, far more dangerous to forget. It is the story of hunger. Long before the clash of shields, before the roar of longships cutting through frozen seas, the true battle began in the earth itself. In fields carved from rock-hard soil. In short summers where the sun barely lingered. In harvests that could mean life, or extinction. Every Viking warrior who ever lifted a blade was first a child who needed to eat. Every raid, every saga, every legend depended on one fragile question being answered again and again. What will keep us alive through the night? The north was not generous. Crops failed. Frost arrived early. Storms destroyed months of labor in a single day. Yet Viking society did not collapse. It adapted. It learned. It selected, refined, and protected a hidden arsenal: 9 powerful grains that could grow where others died, that could nourish bodies under constant strain, that could turn scarcity into strength. These grains were not just food. They were strategy. They thickened blood against the cold. They fueled muscles for rowing across black seas. They sustained pregnant women, growing children, and aging elders alike. They fermented into drink, hardened into bread, boiled into porridge that could warm a body from the inside out. In the longhouses, where smoke clung to the rafters and winter stretched endlessly, these grains were eaten slowly, reverently, because everyone knew what they represented. Survival. But today, their names barely echo. Some have vanished entirely. Others exist only as pale, weakened shadows of what they once were. We replace them with faster, softer, easier crops. Crops that grow quickly but do not endure. Crops that fill the stomach but not the soul, nor the body under true pressure. And with that replacement, something else disappeared. Endurance. The Vikings did not count calories. They counted winters survived. They did not chase comfort. They chased resilience. Their food was chosen not for taste alone, but for what it did after the meal, how it carried them through labor, cold, fear, and hunger. These grains were selected over generations, tested by famine, refined by death itself. Only what worked remained. Every lost grain is a lost lesson. Some thickened stews so dense they could sustain a warrior through an entire day of marching. Some were ground into dark flours that baked into bread so heavy it was cut with knives, not torn by hand. Some fermented slowly in wooden vats, becoming drinks that preserved nutrients through the dead months when nothing grew. Others were fed to animals first, then returned to humans as milk, cheese, and meat, an indirect survival loop perfected over centuries. This was not accidental agriculture. It was survival engineering. And yet, history rarely speaks of it. We celebrate the raid, but ignore the meal that made it possible. We praise the blade, but forget the bread. The sagas sing of kings and battles, but they are silent about the quiet miracle of food that did not fail. Until now. Because buried beneath modern diets, beneath polished supermarket shelves and ultra-processed convenience, the old grains are waiting. Waiting to be remembered. Waiting to be grown again. Waiting to show us what real nourishment once meant when food was not about pleasure, but about staying alive in a world that wanted you dead. This is not nostalgia. This is not fantasy. This is a reckoning. In the sections ahead, we will uncover 9 forgotten grains that powered Viking warriors through endless cold, brutal labor, and unrelenting hardship. Grains that modern science is only now beginning to understand. Grains that could change how we eat, how we endure, and how we face a future that looks increasingly uncertain. But first, we must confront a hard truth. The Vikings did not survive because they were stronger than nature. They survived because they listened to it. And the soil remembers what we have forgotten. What kind of food grows where winter sharpens its teeth, where soil is thin, summers are cruelly short, and failure means starvation? In the north, this question was not philosophical. It was a matter of survival. The first grain the Vikings trusted was not chosen for beauty or abundance. It was chosen because it refused to die. While softer crops withered beneath frost and rain, this grain endured dark, stubborn, and unyielding. It sank its roots deep into poor soil, drank from cold rains, and stood tall against winds that flattened everything else. This grain was rye. Rye did not promise comfort. It promised survival. Its stalks grew where wheat surrendered. Its seeds matured even when the sun vanished early behind gray skies. And when harvested, rye delivered something no Viking could ignore: heat. Not the heat of fire, but the slow-burning warmth that spread through the body hours after eating, keeping hands steady and minds sharp long after daylight faded. In the longhouse, rye bread was heavy enough to feel like a weapon in the hand. Dense. Dark. Almost bitter. It did not crumble. It endured just like the people who ate it. A single slice could carry a farmer through hours of frozen labor, a sailor through endless rowing, a guard through a night watch where sleep meant death. Rye worked quietly. It thickened blood, stabilized energy, and resisted spoilage. Molds struggled to claim it. Time itself moved slower against it. Stored in cool spaces, rye bread could last weeks, even months, becoming harder but never useless. Hardened loaves were soaked, boiled, broken apart and reborn into meals that still carried strength. This mattered more than flavor ever could. Because hunger in the north was not sudden. It crept. It lingered. It waited for weakness. And rye denied it entry. But rye did more than feed the body. It shaped the mind. Meals built on rye did not spike energy and abandon the eater hours later. They released strength gradually, predictably perfect for a world where exhaustion could be fatal. A warrior who collapsed from hunger was as good as dead. Rye made sure collapse came later, or not at all. It also fed animals. Rye straw warmed floors. Rye grain fattened livestock. Rye returned again and again, cycling through Viking life until nothing was wasted. This was not abundance. This was efficiency sharpened by desperation. And yet, rye was not alone. Beside it grew barley, the grain of flexibility, the grain that adapted itself to whatever the north demanded. Barley could be boiled into porridge thick enough to stand a spoon upright. It could be baked into flatbreads cooked on hot stones. It could be fermented into drink when clean water failed or froze. Barley was nourishment and insurance. In years when harvests were poor, barley matured faster than most crops, slipping just ahead of early frost. When sickness spread through water sources, barley beer weak, cloudy, but safe kept people alive. When bodies weakened, barley porridge became the first food given to the old, the wounded, the newborn. This was grain with 1,000 lives. Together, rye and barley formed the backbone of Viking endurance. One refused to die. The other adapted to anything. They were not luxuries. They were lifelines. But there was a cost. These grains demanded effort. Grinding rye required strength. Barley husks resisted removal. Meals took time, patience, skill. And in a world already exhausted by survival, convenience was tempting. Easier grains existed, but they failed when needed most. The Vikings chose the hard path deliberately. Because they understood something we have forgotten: food should challenge you a little so life doesn't destroy you completely. As winters lengthened and communities grew, these grains became more than sustenance. They became symbols of preparedness. A full rice storehouse meant confidence. Empty barrels meant fear whispered through the night. And fear spread faster than hunger. But even rye and barley could not solve every problem. Cold stripped calories faster than any enemy. Labor demanded more fuel. Long voyages burned strength beyond normal limits. For that, the Vikings turned to grains that were smaller, humbler, and far more powerful than they appeared. Grains that hid their strength behind obscurity. Grains most of the world no longer remembers. And it is there, beneath the shadow of better-known staples, that the real secrets of Viking survival begin to surface. What kind of strength comes not from size, but from persistence? In the Viking world, the answer lay in grains so small they could slip through careless fingers, yet so powerful they could carry a body through weeks of hardship. These were not the grains sung about in later histories. They were not grand, not impressive, not easy. But they were essential. One of them was oats. Oats thrived where the north grew impatient. Where rain drowned other crops. Where soil turned thin and sour. Oats did not complain. They accepted wet summers, cold mornings, and uncertain harvests with quiet resilience. To the Vikings, oats were reliability made edible. Boiled into thick porridge, oats delivered warmth that seemed to radiate outward from the stomach, loosening stiff joints, calming hunger, and steadying nerves. This was not a warrior's feast, it was a survivor's shield. Oat porridge was eaten before long journeys, before hunts, before days when the body would be pushed beyond comfort. It was also the grain of recovery. When sickness crept through settlements, oats became the food of healing. Easy to digest, slow to release energy, gentle on weakened bodies. Children were raised on it. Elders survived because of it. In a society that could not afford to lose its people, oats quietly held everything together. But oats alone were not enough. Hidden among them was a grain even older, even more forgotten: emmer. Emmer wheat was nothing like the pale, fragile wheat we know today. Its husk clung stubbornly to the kernel, protecting it from moisture, insects, and decay. It demanded labor to unlock, but rewarded that labor with strength. Emmer was dense, mineral-rich, and deeply nourishing. It built muscle slowly. It sustained energy over long hours. It fed those who worked hardest. This was grain for builders. For shipwrights shaping oak planks in freezing air. For farmers breaking ground with iron-tipped plows. For warriors training not for glory but for endurance. Emmer bread was heavy. It did not rise easily. It filled the mouth and the stomach with equal seriousness. Eating it was a commitment. And in that commitment, the Vikings found power. Alongside emmer grew spelt, a grain that walked the line between toughness and generosity. Spelt tolerated cold better than softer wheats. It resisted disease. It grew reliably when others failed. Its flavor was nutty, grounding, satisfying. Spelt bread was prized not because it was rare, but because it lasted. Spelt nourished those who traveled. Its baked forms resisted spoilage better than most. Carried on voyages, broken into pieces, soaked in water or broth, spelt could be revived again and again. Each bite carried the memory of land long left behind, a reminder of home in a world of ice and waves. These grains did something subtle but vital. They stabilized life. Where hunger makes people reckless, steady nourishment makes them patient. Where scarcity breeds fear, reliability builds trust. In Viking settlements, grain stores were not just food supplies, they were emotional anchors. Knowing that oats, emmer, and spelt waited beneath the floorboards meant one more night of sleep without panic. But the North demanded more than steadiness. It demanded intensity. Cold stripped calories faster than hunger alone. Hard labor burned fuel mercilessly. Long winters required fat, heat, density food that did not just sustain, but fortified. And for that, the Vikings turned to grains that modern mouths would barely recognize. Grains that blurred the line between food and fuel. Grains that could push a body beyond normal limits. Grains whose return might matter now more than ever. What do you eat when warmth itself is disappearing? In the North, cold was not an inconvenience. It was an enemy that never slept. It crept into bones, slowed blood, dulled thought, and turned simple mistakes into fatal ones. To survive it, the Vikings needed more than steady nourishment, they needed density. Concentration. Food that burned slowly, deeply, and relentlessly, long after the meal was finished. This is where the strangest grains entered their lives. One of them was millet. Millet was small, round, and easily overlooked, yet it carried a remarkable secret: it cooked quickly, digested efficiently, and delivered immediate warmth. In moments when fire was scarce and time was short, millet porridge could be prepared fast and shared widely. It was often eaten before nightfall, its heat settling into the body before darkness took over. Millet was the grain of urgency. When storms closed in suddenly, when hunters returned exhausted, when the cold arrived earlier than expected, millet bridged the gap between hunger and safety. It did not last as long as rye. It did not endure storage as well as barley. But in critical moments, it saved lives. Then there was einkorn. Ancient beyond memory, einkorn was one of the earliest grains ever cultivated and one of the toughest. Its genetic simplicity made it resilient, adaptable, and deeply nourishing. Einkorn bread was rich, heavy, and satisfying in a way that modern grains rarely achieve. It filled the body quickly, slowed hunger, and delivered a dense package of nutrients that mattered when food was scarce. Einkorn fed strength at the cellular level. It was often reserved for those whose bodies were pushed hardest: pregnant women, recovering warriors, men preparing for long voyages. Not because it was rare, but because it was valuable. Every kernel represented concentrated survival. But the true secret weapons were not always eaten directly. Some grains were fermented. In a world where clean water could not be trusted year-round, fermentation was not indulgence, it was preservation. Barley and other grains were soaked, heated, cooled, and transformed into weak beers and grain-based drinks that carried calories, minerals, and safety in every cloudy sip. These drinks were not meant to intoxicate. They were meant to sustain. Sipped slowly through the day, they replaced lost energy, warmed the body, and kept dehydration at bay. In winter, when water froze solid and snow could weaken the body, fermented grain drinks became liquid survival. Grain was also fed to animals not as waste, but as strategy. Cattle, goats, and sheep transformed grain into fat, milk, and warmth. That milk became butter and cheese, dense, long-lasting, and powerful. In this way, grain returned to humans in even more concentrated forms, carrying warmth and energy when the cold reached its peak. Nothing was accidental. Every kernel was part of a system designed to fight winter itself. The Vikings understood that survival was not about eating once. It was about eating right. About choosing foods that worked together: fast heat, slow burn, long endurance. About stacking advantages against an environment that offered none. These grains were not glamorous. They were not celebrated in song. But they stood between life and death on nights when the fire burned low and the wind howled like something alive. And yet, even these were not the final answer. Because as voyages grew longer and battles fiercer, the Vikings faced a new challenge: how to carry survival across the sea. Food that could travel. Food that could endure salt spray, damp air, and endless motion. Food that could keep a warrior alive when land itself vanished. And that is where the last, most forgotten grains come into play. What kind of food can survive when the world turns into water? For the Vikings, the sea was not a boundary, it was a road. But it was a road that punished weakness relentlessly. Salt air soaked everything. Moisture crept into bones, clothes, and supplies. Space was limited. Weight mattered. Spoilage meant death. And once the coastline vanished behind the stern, there was no return until fate allowed it. To cross that road, Vikings needed food that could travel as hard as they did. The answer came in the form of grains transformed beyond their original state, baked, dried, hardened, and prepared not for comfort, but for endurance. One of the most vital was hard grain bread, often made from barley, rye, spelt, or einkorn, baked again and again until moisture was driven out completely. These breads were not soft. They were closer to stone than food. They were broken with tools, soaked in water, broth, or fermented drink, and eaten slowly. Each piece released its energy over time, making it possible to row for hours, to stand watch through freezing nights, to fight after days without proper rest. This bread did not rot. Mold struggled to claim it. In sealed containers, it could last months, sometimes longer. It was survival compressed into a portable form. Alongside it traveled roasted grains. Barley and oats were heated until dry and brittle, then stored in leather bags or wooden barrels. When hunger struck, these grains could be chewed dry, mixed with water, or tossed into boiling liquid to create instant nourishment. Roasting not only preserved them, it made them safer, more digestible, and quicker to use. These were the Vikings' emergency rations. Small handfuls could silence hunger just long enough to survive the next stretch of ocean. In moments when storms delayed landfall or supplies ran low, roasted grain meant the difference between discipline and panic. There was also flour, but not the fine, delicate flour we know today. Viking flour was coarse, heavy, and alive with fiber and nutrients. It absorbed moisture slowly, resisted spoilage, and could be turned into food with minimal tools. A flat stone. A bit of water. A fire, if luck allowed. Even without baking, flour could be boiled into gruel, thickened into paste, or mixed with animal fat for dense, energy-rich meals. This flexibility mattered. On long voyages, unpredictability ruled. A food that could become many things was priceless. But perhaps the most overlooked traveling grain was one that barely resembled grain at all: once prepared grain mixed with fat. Animal fat was blended with crushed grains, dried berries, and sometimes honey, forming dense blocks of survival food. These mixtures packed enormous calories into small sizes. They were heavy, yes, but they burned like slow embers inside the body, releasing warmth and strength for hours. These were eaten sparingly. Not because they were scarce, but because they were powerful. A warrior did not eat such food unless he needed it. Before battle. During storms. When weakness threatened focus. This was not everyday nourishment. This was reserve strength. Through these grains, the Vikings carried land with them across the sea. Every bite was a memory of fields, harvests, and longhouses far behind. Every meal reinforced discipline, patience, and trust in preparation. And preparation was everything. Because when land finally appeared on the horizon, foreign, unknown, often hostile, the Vikings did not arrive starving. They arrived fueled. Ready. Focused. But there was one more layer to their grain wisdom. Something deeper than survival. Something that connected food not just to the body but to identity, belief, and legacy. And it is there, in the final grains and their meanings, that the true power of Viking nourishment reveals itself.